We're going to present on the topic on communication issues and cultural differences in international acquisitions and mergers. The case study that we're using is the BenQ's acquisition of Siemens mobile phone division. Before we start our presentation formal, let us take a look at the video, which will give us a rough idea of what communication issues and cultural problems can bring about.
It's a big world, full of difference and diversity. How you see others is influenced by your own cultural perspective, and how others see you is influenced by their cultural perspective. What happens when you speak? Do people from other cultures understand you in the way you intended? And what happens with different cultures in the workplace? How rigid or flexible is their approach to rules? Is formal or informal behaviour expected? And how do different cultures approach timekeeping? In today's global business environment, it is essential to learn how to navigate across different cultural landscapes. You need a good set of tools to do this. You need an understanding of how different cultures trade and do business, an insight into how different cultures communicate, and a clear idea of how different cultures manage people. To be a savvy global traveller, you need to be willing to undertake the journey of understanding other cultures. Develop cultural intelligence so you can communicate confidently across cultures.
Alright, so as depicted in the video, we can see that understanding cultural differences is very important if you want to have a successful communication with anybody. BenQ grabbed the international headlines when they acquired the money-losing mobile phone divisions of Siemens and launched the new brand BenQ Siemens. However, what seems to be a very successful acquisition turns out to be actually a strategic mistake. There was negligence of each other's culture by the management, and therefore the ineffective communication led to the unsuccessful integration. Now let me introduce to you my group members and the overview of our presentation today. I'm Lilan, and I will give you a brief introduction of this case. Xue here will talk to you more about the cultural backgrounds of the two companies. Zheng will discuss about the significant communication issues that arise out of this acquisition, and Kahin will talk to you the improvements that our group thinks can be made and the application of it in Singapore's context. I will then conclude our presentation. Let me bring you through the timeline of the key events. In 1847, Siemens was founded in Munich and Berlin as a multinational engineering and electronics company. BenQ, which was initially known as Acer Peripherals, was founded in Taiwan in 1984 as a consumer electronics contract manufacturer. It was only later, in 2001, that they were rebranded as BenQ. BenQ's chairman, Lee Kun Yao, sought to develop a globally recognized brand image, increase the product line, and expand the contract manufacturing business. Therefore, they seized the perfect opportunity on 7th June 2005, where he acquired the ailing mobile devices division of Siemens. The diagram here shows us the supposed benefits that will arise out of this acquisition. However, when BenQ Mobile started operation, this new business division started in 1st October 2005, but it led to the BenQ suffering losses instead of expected profits. Therefore, in order to manage the losses, on 28 September 2006, barely a year later, BenQ decided to file for bankruptcy protection in Germany, and thousands of employees are being laid off. Before we analyze the business for this failed acquisition, we will need to understand the cultural backgrounds of these two companies. I will leave it to Xue to continue. Xue, please.
Thank you, Lilan. Now let's examine the cultural difference of this particular case. When it comes to culture, the iceberg theory tells us that what we say, observe, hear, and taste only represent 10% of the culture. The other 90%, the so-called deep culture, is not easily visible because it's made up of core values, perceptions, priorities, and beliefs. My presentation today will be focusing on this part. Our group have selected 4 dimensions that are specific to this case. On a national level, we have individualism, power distance, and uncertainty avoidance. On a company level, we have the corporate culture. First of all, individualism. What's individualism? The definition is on the screen, but in plain words, it's the extent to which people think I am more important than we. Based on Hofstede's research, we could rate both nations in terms of individualism on a scale between 0 and 120. If we look at the spectrum, Taiwan has an individualism index of 17, meaning Taiwanese people care more about the group. They tend to prioritize the group welfare and harmony over their self-interest. In contrast, Germany is at the other end of the spectrum, scoring 68. To most Germans, individual rights and personal achievement are more important. This cultural difference explains why most Taiwanese employees are willing to work overtime to meet challenging product development deadlines, and why German employees strictly separate their life from their work. Next, power distance. Basically, it reflects people's attitudes towards hierarchy and authority. Again, we can see the contrast between the two. The Germanic culture puts strong emphasis on equality and democracy, while the Taiwanese culture, deeply rooted in Confucianism, accept hierarchy and unevenly distributed power. In this case, the power to make decisions in BenQ is held in the hands of the chairman, whereas it's more decentralized for Siemens because individual employees could have an influence over the final decisions through platforms like the trade unions. The next dimension is uncertainty avoidance. As the name suggests, it measures the extent to which people feel comfortable about ambiguity and risk. Interestingly, Taiwan and Germany are quite similar in this sense. As you can see, both dislike uncertainty, both are risk averse and therefore resistant to change. This could be the reason why Siemens employees were not supportive from the beginning, and why BenQ decided to file for bankruptcy after only 1 year since the acquisition. Lastly, let's look at the corporate culture. The regional company BenQ, according to their chairman, has a rather flexible and informal organizational culture. They thrive on innovation and enterprising spirit. On the other hand, the century-old Siemens, the multinational Siemens, has a very, very conservative and structured corporate culture. Most of their decisions are made following the standard operating procedures. Therefore, it doesn't come as a surprise when the Forbes magazine comments that the rigid Siemens corporate culture is not open to change. Well, so far we might conclude that there is this huge cultural gap between the two companies. But a key point to note here is that this cultural gap itself doesn't result in failure. Instead, it's the inability to communicate effectively, to recognize this cultural gap, and to bridge it that leads to the business failure. With this, I'll pass the time to Zhenqi for the analysis of the communication issues.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. In events of mergers and acquisitions, communication issues often arise because of cultural differences and lack of understanding of such differences. Our group has highlighted the following significant issues: barriers in understanding different messages, failure to handle employees' uncertainty, and lack of effective internal communication. When dealing with controversial issues, German people tend to communicate in a more direct way, while Taiwanese people tend to express themselves in a roundabout way to avoid open disagreement. For instance, when asked about Siemens employee layoffs, Chairman Li of BenQ provided an ambiguous response by saying that, so far, BenQ does not plan to shut any factories. Since Li was aware of the impact of his words and actions on other people, he diverted his conversations and obscured his answers to specific questions. In fact, top management of BenQ might prefer not communicating anything rather than communicating information that later turns out to be incorrect. However, if BenQ chose a more direct way of communication, it may reduce the impact of German media, which claim that BenQ merely wanted to use Siemens' name to launch its mobile phone, but really did not plan on reviving it. During the acquisition, the Siemens employee felt deceived and betrayed by the German top management, and they had no trust in BenQ, which they thought was just an enterprise with no marketing experience and no competence. So under such circumstances, the employees believed that if they had known what was going on, the situation would be easier and less disappointing. Apparently, BenQ did not create any suitable internal communication channels to reduce the rumors and anxiety among the employees. And failure to do so only increases stress, uncertainty, and turnover among the employees and decreases their job satisfaction, commitment, and intentions to remain. After the acquisition, BenQ's decision to cut its financial support for the German subsidiary was criticized as rushed and irresponsible in Germany, while it was deemed rational to many in Taiwan. There was also disagreement between German top management and Taipei's headquarters over the development process of the new products. While BenQ planned to implement its new business, it did not communicate this in a concise and consistent manner. It seemed to assume that the management team would understand why these changes were taking place. So, the result of this problem is that the poor communication confused the employees, undermined top-down implementation, and slowed down the reorganization process. Generally speaking, in order to gain quick access, typically a variety of integration mechanisms are to be used to impose control on the subsidiary company. BenQ, however, did not establish or implement any rigorous set of systems and rules over its subsidiary company. As a result, the lack of integration mechanism further intensified all the communication issues I mentioned previously, which in the end contributed to the failure of BenQ Siemens. So with that, I end my part, and I will pass on the time to Tahim, who will continue on the improvement and lessons learned from the case study. Thank you.
Thank you, Zhenqi. I hope that by now, most of you are convinced that poor intercultural communication has a strong part to play in the failed acquisition of Siemens Mobile. Now, imagine if you guys were the CEO of BenQ. Could you guys have done a better job? The answer is obviously yes. To do so, my group recommends a three-step approach which BenQ could have adopted. The first step will be culture affects communication. BenQ should recognize that for effective communication to happen, the element of culture must never be disregarded. To put it simply, people of different cultures communicate differently. To bridge this cultural gap, BenQ should hire employees who understand the importance of the intercultural sensitivities in communication. These employees will then play a pivotal role in the communication between the headquarters in Taiwan and the subsidiary in Germany. Such executives could include Taiwanese educated in German universities or vice versa. The second step will be cultural understanding. So, what do I mean by cultural understanding? Basically, BenQ should relearn its own Taiwanese culture and at the same time know more about the German culture. BenQ should try to understand the subconscious portions of both cultures. Just as my teammate Shewei mentioned earlier about the iceberg theory of culture, a significant portion of a culture actually lies within this internal portion, away from our conscious awareness. To really understand this internal portion well, it requires BenQ employees of both countries to put in a conscientious effort to empathize and to carefully study their cultural differences. Let us now proceed on to the third and last step, which is comparison and reconciliation. Under this phase, BenQ should introduce policies which can not only prevent conflicts, but more importantly, derive synergies from such differences. BenQ should encourage its employees to talk openly about their cultural differences before creating a common corporate culture together. A common corporate culture will have to instill a sense of belonging and identity among BenQ employees, both Taiwanese and German. Hopefully, the employees will stop segregating themselves as either BenQ employees or Siemens employees. Instead, they will see themselves as members of a new organization, BenQ Siemens Mobile. I'm sure most of you will have this question in your mind right now. Why are they doing a presentation about BenQ? The answer is simple. Take a look at the Singaporean culture. The Singaporean culture is highly collectivist with a high power distance index. This is actually very similar to Taiwanese culture. Such cultural similarities implies that Singaporean firms are likely to encounter similar challenges during their international acquisition overseas, especially involving firms of a different culture. A very good example in this case could be German culture. I hope that through my presentation today, you can see the relevance of this case study and perhaps apply some of the steps that I mentioned earlier in your future company. With that, I would like to pass the time over to Lila, who will wrap up our presentation for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kahit. Our analysis indicates that the Taiwanese BenQ and German Siemens are actually different in several ways, from national culture to corporate culture. This field acquisition is a wake-up call for everyone, and it provides a lot of lessons for companies that wish to expand their business through acquisitions or mergers. We think that in order for an international acquisition or merger to be successful, the managers need to acknowledge the cultural differences of the companies and therefore be able to allocate enough time and resources for assimilation. Furthermore, the managers have to specify their objectives and performance expectations during the integration process of the companies. We hope that through the analysis of this case study done by our group, we will be able to tell you the importance of tackling cultural differences intelligently and therefore be able to prevent potential communication problems in the future. With that, we have come to the end of our presentation. Thank you very much. Now we'll open the floor to questions.
Any questions?
All the cultures you have been talking about is a national base, is a Taiwanese culture and German culture. And we know that there are a lot of successful mergers and acquisitions. But can you tell me more about the characteristics of this industry? Why this industry, the electronic industry, has this kind of thing? Why?
Okay. Thank you for your question. I think that's to the point of our presentation. If you look at the history of Siemens, that's a big company specializing in manufacturers. So it's very likely for them to bring their traditions from one sector from one department to another. In this case, they bring their traditional values to the mobile unit. But as you can see, the mobile nowadays the mobile technology changes very fast. So if you look at Apple, new mobile phones roll out every half a year. So this is a very, very fast industry. If you can't keep pace with this with the fast pace of the industry, you definitely lose out. In this case, BenQ knows the values of this mobile industry, so they have a very fast and flexible organizational culture. But on the other hand, you see, the Siemens cannot do this. There is a clash of their values. So yeah.
So in addition to my teammate's answer, right? So because this is a mobile phone industry, and it's actually different from like maritime industry. So the thing is, for this case only, so there are many factors that contributed to the failure of this acquisition. So there are financial factors, cultural factors, and so on and so forth. So for us, right, we are only focused on the cultural issues, especially on the communication issues. So, but of course, there are also many other reasons. I can give you some example, like how to cut costs in this case. Because usually in German, right, the labor cost is very high, but usually Taiwanese, right, the cost is very low. So initially, Siemens was facing this problem of cost cutting, especially among the employees. So, but however, when Taiwan stepped in, right, so they're also facing this kind of problem, cutting costs, even to a more serious extent, because Taiwan, they are just more flexible with this working, and this industry, they're really flexible with working overtime, but in Germany it's not allowed. So they're facing such a difficult problem. So that is one of the financial reasons why cause their failures. But that, of course, that is not our focus. Our focus